Okay, good morning, everyone. Uh, Good morning, everyone. Thanks to those who have dialed in on time. I'm sure we've all been witnessing that video meetings, calls, webinars don't actually officially start until at least 3 minutes past, and I was determined to change that. So, yes, I think I've succeeded. Um, Start with a quick bit of housekeeping. We're recording this webinar, and we'll share the recording and the slides with you afterwards. So don't worry about making notes. If you have any questions as we go, you can drop them into the chat box, and we'll come to these at the end because that's being monitored. So let me start by introducing myself. I'm Jon Banks, and I've worked in the world of online recruitment for just over 20 years now. I've been involved in international recruitment sales across various industry sectors for the past 14 years, and I've headed up international sales at Totaljobs for the past 4. The next hour is going to be split into 2 equal parts. There's insights from me to start with, followed by an expert panel discussion. So in the first half, I'll be sharing some recent research from Totaljobs. Sectors in the UK have started to open up, and some businesses are seeing people head back to their usual workplace. We wanted to understand the perspective of workers at this time. If you look around the world, markets are at different stages of recovery, and we wanted to use this to build a bit of a wider picture outside of the UK. With this, I'll share what actions businesses can take in terms of implementing safety measures, supporting staff in the return to work, and how this all feeds into a wider people strategy now and into the future. In the second half, I'll be asking opinion and insights from a panel of experts who all have extensive experience and knowledge of global recruitment. As you can see there, they are Anna Lopez of the network, Andy Curlewis of Cielo, and Kristen Anderson of BAT. And I thank them for being obviously agreeing to be part of this. So a bit of background first about Totaljobs. At Totaljobs, we have access to pools of data. This allows us to share in-depth insight into candidates and workers across the UK. We generated an average of 32,000 new applicants each week in May. We saw an average of 35 applications per vacancy on site as we enter an employer-led market. And there were 469,000 active candidates on Totaljobs. By active, these are people who are searching, updating their CVs, and/or applying for roles on the site. A little bit of background on the network. Totaljobs was a founding member of the network in 2002, some 18 years ago. In fact, it was the same year that the euro came into circulation. It is a unique alliance of market-leading job boards within their respective countries and is a not-for-profit organisation. The network now covers over 130 countries, offering unbeatable reach for finding talent outside of the UK for those hiring internationally. When you add all the job boards together that are part of the network, the numbers are truly staggering. And you can access this via one centralized contract, one account manager, one invoice, one time zone. So we've had a look at the lockdown periods of various countries to get a bit of an idea of where we're all at in terms of timelines and the easing of restrictions. As you can see, while a lot of lockdowns in Europe were in fairly quick succession in March, demonstrated by the blue dots, many are covered over by the orange dots, which represent school closures. So naturally, there was a real link up there between countries going into lockdown and the closure of schools. However, the easing of restrictions, such as non-essential shops reopening, sees much bigger differences. Lockdown and the easing of restrictions looks different, not just by country, but for different people. As restrictions ease, more people are talking about how to interpret the rules or have raised questions about how our reactions differ to others around the world. So first, let's look at the UK labour market. When lockdown began, job vacancies decreased. Now, with the reopening of engineering, manufacturing and skilled trades, in response to this government announcement, we've seen record growth numbers of jobs being advertised. This shows the easing of restrictions can have a direct impact on the employment market, signifying a shift to this being employer-led. The latest ONS figures released earlier this week suggest that in May, the number of employees on payrolls were down over 600,000 compared with March. The number of people claiming work-related benefits has also risen dramatically by 126% in the last 2 months to 2.8 million people in May compared to 1.2 in March. The Chancellor also recently announced the extension of the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, extending the current programme until the end of October. So perhaps only then will we see the full impact of this situation. Candidate activity on Totaljobs has increased rapidly in recent months after an initial drop. Similar web data, which pulls traffic data from multiple sites, shows that in April there was a 41% fall in traffic across UK job and career sites, despite the rise in unemployment. However, in May, traffic rose by 22% in the UK, signalling the start of a recovery period. Totaljobs data also shows that candidates have shifted their focus back to searching for permanent roles rather than temporary positions, as seen earlier in the crisis. So this suggests that people are starting to look further ahead to their post-lockdown career options. The OECD, which consists of 37 member countries, have plenty of data for a global look at the impact of coronavirus and the lockdown of economies. They've predicted how GDP might change depending on different scenarios, one being no second wave and the other being a second wave this year, highlighted there by the orange. Overall, the euro area GDP is expected to fall by 11.5% this year if a second wave breaks out, and by over 9% if a second hit is avoided. You can see here that France, Italy, and the UK are on similar paths, while predictions for Canada, Germany, USA, and Japan aren't so severe. Just to be clear, again, these are annual GDP figures, not monthly. I'm sure we all saw the graphs last week. We showed a contraction of 20% in the month of April for the UK, which is really not a very pleasant looking graph. So looking further afield, I speak to our partners in the network often. In fact, every week, Anna Lopez has been chairing a meeting amongst partners, and we've been sharing insights from our respective companies since the start of lockdown. And this has given us unique access to job seeker behaviour and employer sentiment on a global scale. Many report a tentative recovery as businesses reopen, and we're seeing parallels in recovery, with candidate activity and job postings beginning to rise following a fall at the peak of the crisis. But we're not yet at the typical level a market would expect in a normal year. It's extremely interesting to hear about the different approaches taken by countries and the speed with which the state of play changes on a week-by-week basis. This is by far one of the most interesting meetings of my new working week. And no offense to everyone else that I have meetings with during the week, but it's really, really interesting to hear what other countries have to say. As you can see here, Denmark went into lockdown 4 to 6 weeks before some of their European counterparts and were able to ease restrictions earlier. And now their job postings and traffics are getting closer to pre-COVID-19 levels. On Tuesday's call this week, the network partner in China was explaining how from the previous week of everything being open, the shops, bars, attractions, to as of Tuesday or on Tuesday's call, saying that Beijing has gone back into lockdown following a fresh outbreak. So the speed of this changing is, no one knows what it's going to look like from week to week. So the pandemic has impacted economies around the world. PwC publishes a weekly economic update, which I'd highly recommend taking a look at if you haven't already. Looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the UK economy, PwC envisage a decline in annual GDP in 2020 of around 5 to 10%, but with a recovery later this year and into 2021. According to PwC, 24% of businesses which have temporarily closed expect to start trading again within the next 4 weeks. 31% of businesses expect to start trading again in more than four weeks. The rest are unsure. This suggests that there is still a high level of uncertainty, although it is worth noting that this research was conducted between the 4th and the 26th of May, prior to the announcement of non-essential retail shops being able to reopen on Monday of this week, 15th of June. After lockdown ends, PwC say we may see spending behaviours move towards more local and ethical businesses. 34% of consumers surveyed said they would buy from brands or stores which look after their staff after lockdown. And 31% indicated that they would buy from brands or stores which support the NHS and vulnerable. Moving on now to the experiences of UK workers specifically. We've gathered insight from nearly 7,000 UK workers within our candidate database from mid-May this year. We also had similar research undertaken by colleagues in Germany, Austria, France, and Belgium, so I'll be able to give you a snapshot about how worker sentiment differs across these areas versus the UK. Our research shows that only 15% of workers have not been affected by the pandemic and lockdown in terms of their working and employment conditions. Some managed to continue working like normal from home. The ONS estimates that 20 million people have relocated to home offices. Others have been furloughed to protect their jobs, and others have unfortunately faced redundancy. Official figures state 9 million workers are currently in furlough. Of course, it's not just employment status or the way people do their jobs which has changed as a result of COVID-19. There's a lot of other factors it's essential for businesses to consider, and many of these listed here have a ripple effect on one another. Our research also shows that over 2/3 of UK workers are concerned about their job security. Businesses should look to acknowledge and address these concerns to support their staff. In turn, this extends to worry about the impact on personal finances. Alongside this, the importance of mental health has been highlighted due to the impact lockdown has had on people's well-being. This needs to be a core part of your back to business strategy to boost team morale as well as productivity. This situation has also led many to consider their career, with 28% feeling their job is less meaningful since lockdown. If we compare some of these key factors with respondents from other countries, you can see some differentiation in terms of how people have felt negatively impacted. UK workers are the most negatively affected by the lockdown in terms of personal finances and both mental and physical health. 2 in 3 workers feel a negative impact on personal finances versus less than 1 in 2 in France and about 1 in 3 in Belgium. For many, there is a desire to be back in the workplace. 48% of UK workers now want to return to their workplace, with 54% of that group aspiring to be back in the workplace by the end of June. UK workers cite seeing their colleagues, rebalancing work and life, and getting back into a routine as some of the things they're looking forward to. Comparing this to our international data, it's workers in Germany who are the most eager to be back to the workplace at 60%, followed by the UK at 50%, France at 42%, and a third of workers in Belgium. We asked some of our friends in the network to tell us what their current work setup is. While in many countries, working from home is still the norm for all UK staff, as you can see in the case of UK, Ireland, Mexico, Morocco, and Spain. Others have had a phased return with anything from 5% of the workforce in Sweden and Hungary to 50% in Belgium and over 50% in the offices in Germany, Denmark, Albania, and Austria. Our total jobs teams in the UK are currently all working from home, and when the time comes, 10% of our workforce will return to our offices on a voluntary basis. We've had an internal survey sent round where staff have been able to indicate their willingness and to add any specific concerns or considerations. This can then help us build up our back to business planning. So if we look at the optimism about returning to work. Our UK survey went out in the days following the government advice shifting from stay-at-home messaging to stay alert, with those who could not work from home now encouraged to go to work. Our Belgium and French surveys were in the field the same week of 11th of May, while Austria's survey was carried out earlier that month. For a bit of brief context, France's lockdown was considered strict, with travel permits needed initially to justify trips out of the house. Restrictions began to ease on 11th of May, with phase 2 earlier in June. The country now uses green zones and orange or red zones to highlight where restrictions can ease faster or slower. In Belgium, restrictions are being eased more slowly. Masks were required on public transport since the beginning of May, while some shops opened with social distancing on 11th of May. In comparison, Austria was one of the first countries to ease lockdown. Large shops, shopping centres and hairdressers reopened in early May, while parks, smaller shops and garden centres have been open since mid-April. Comparing sentiment across UK workers are in fact twice as likely to comparing sentiment across countries, UK workers are in fact twice as likely to go back to want to go back to work as usual versus other markets surveyed. You can see that in the final set of columns. UK workers overwhelmingly want to get back to a routine, 59% versus only 10% in France. Workers in Belgium and Austria sit in between those two extremes at 25 and 29%. There's also a key piece here around work-life balance. Some people may have found they've been working longer hours at home. It's harder to switch off maybe. For UK workers in particular, this is an important factor for their overall job satisfaction. Being able to have clear boundaries between work and home life is something that many workers want to see on their return to the workplace, and is one factor making them feel optimistic about the future. These are a few examples of how people are currently feeling from our research. If you're able to map out how employees are feeling and the reasons behind this, employers can then establish a relevant communication strategy that is aligned with the mindsets of their employees, which acknowledges any concerns they have and ultimately meets their needs. Building trust is also essential. Our research shows that 43% of workers don't feel they can trust their safety will be guaranteed by their employer. This speaks to a potential lack of clarity. There are steps businesses can take to show staff their opinions and concerns are being taken on board, and actions are being taken to support their health and safety. With this, 60% of UK workers believe that the world of work will never be the same again. For some, this idea might be exciting. For others, may be anxiety inducing. This is something businesses should acknowledge and be transparent about the actions being taken to allow for this transition, keeping in mind that not everyone is looking forward to the return to the workplace. Some concerns could be linked to the fear of the unknown. There is a collective hyper-awareness of the changes that the pandemic has brought to our jobs and the world of work, as well as the obvious changes to how we're navigating the world generally, with new social distancing precautions or face masks on public transport being brought in on 15th of June in the UK. So what do employees want to see? Over half, 56% of workers are concerned about their safety when going back to work, and 65% believe it is their employer's responsibility to ensure their health and safety once lockdown is lifted. A quarter are not sure which safety measures they would like to see in their work environment, which is why businesses can look to highlight their adherence to government guidelines and recommendations to help put staff at ease. Those that do have specific actions in mind want to see things like strict hygiene measures, social distancing, and PPE. A significant number, 40%, want to see flexible working hours, and 35% want to see shifts to reduce the amount of people in the workplace. This could also help to meet concerns around the commute. A third of employees, 32%, are concerned about their safety in travelling to work. But not surprisingly, for Londoners who are more likely to rely on public transport, this figure is higher at 60% being concerned. In fact, a quarter of workers have already asked their employer if they can work from home indefinitely, while 42% are planning to request this. Of those who have asked already, 15% have had their request refused. This, this could become the next HR challenger across the world if staff are keen for this way of working to stay. 26% of workers say the pandemic has led to their employer being more open to flexible working, and 28% have said the opposite. So many companies were already offering more flexible working, but perhaps obviously what we're going through now has sped up this process of that companies might be thinking about. Whatever you decide, you need to communicate with your teams. Our research shows that almost half of UK workers don't know what their employer's plan is for the return to work. With this, 38% of workers said their company communicated well about its performance and plans during the crisis, while 36% said the opposite. A very similar number, so there's some real disparity here, and there's implications for employee trust and loyalty. Findings from a separate research piece we did back in April shows that the actions of businesses at this time really do have the power to impact staff's perception and the opinions of potential candidates too. 3 in 10 people say their perception of their employer has changed as a result of how they have responded to COVID-19. Over a third said they feel more positive about their employer as a result of their response. and 1 in 4 feel more loyal to their company after their response to COVID-19. In future interviews, candidates are more likely to be asking a potential employer what actions they took following COVID-19. So what will you say in that scenario? Bear all this in mind when finalizing your own comms plans or employer brand strategy. Our sister company, Universum, have recently been sharing their advice on successful employee engagement at this time. They looked at this through the lens of psychology and identified what's called the 5 stages of grief. As people, we typically move from grief to denial, anger, despair, bargaining, and finally acceptance of a situation. At the moment, we're moving into the final stages of the grief process. Alongside that emotional support element of checking in on staff well-being and forming a long-term well-being program, employers need to ensure they're giving staff the information they need to navigate the bargaining and acceptance stages. Bargaining might be thought processes like, as long as safety measures are in place, I'll be able to go back to work and see my colleagues. Whereas acceptance is, the pandemic is out of my control, but my employer will be flexible and teams will continue to adapt to see this through. It's about learning from the last few months and giving direction and guidance to properly resonate with staff at the right time. As employers, we need to be considering things like the mindsets of staff and how different people's experiences of the pandemic, of lockdown, or of working at home or on the front line shape these mindsets. Within my own team, we have a huge difference of experiences over the past 10 to 12 weeks. Empathize with staff and set out timely comms and guidance so they feel confident that the right steps are being taken. Be prepared to be flexible now and in the future. Many people have found themselves more productive and happier at home. Others thrive in the typical office environment and are desperate to get back to that. Look outside of your industry and the UK to further afield to learn from other global approaches. And this one we'll explore more in our panel discussion shortly. So to finish up, I want to focus on what makes a successful people strategy. Whether you're currently experiencing growth or hiring is on pause, you can take some of these actions away with you and implement them when the time is right. Be vocal about your brand values and how your people are integral to you as a business. Those hiring, make the remote onboarding process as smooth as you can. Get feedback from candidates at each stage and see what learnings you can take from this once you're back in the workplace to reduce your time to hire. What initiatives have you introduced to staff to boost engagement and morale? Have you been supporting local charities or the UK's key workers? Have some of your furloughed staff been volunteering while away from work? Corporate social responsibility is in very sharp focus at the moment and will be in the future. Remote working has brought our walls down a bit. Employees are more likely to be vocal about what's gone right and wrong to their peers. And we're also seeing more people engage with their employers to highlight areas to improve. By working with staff, you can inspire real advocacy and ultimately loyalty and long-term retention. Finally, navigating this recovery will mean we need to reassess jobs and skills. By supporting staff in reskilling or upskilling to focus on areas that are the most essential for business recovery and growth, you will be putting yourself in good stead. So that's all the slides I have for you at this time. So it's time to move on to our panel discussion now. So thank you to those who submitted questions when they registered for this seminar, and feel free to also add questions into the chat box. And we'll kick things off with some submitted questions from our experts. Clearly, we'll follow up with anything that we don't get to cover. So firstly, I want to say a big thank you to our panelists for agreeing to be part of this webinar and each bring their own expertise on a global scale. So I'm going to ask them all to, and they could obviously do a far better job at introducing themselves than I can. So I need to stop sharing, which I think I've done, and I need to ask them all to turn their webcams on. So if we could please do that, I can see 3, 4. Smooth. Excellent. So thank you very much. So yeah, if you could just give a 20-30 second brief introduction to yourself, and Anna, I shall start with you.
Hi, thank you for having me. Really cool to be here. Very quickly, hi people, I'm Anna. I work for the network for the last 8 years. Huge passion about simplifying global talent for companies and big fan of hybrid working models.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Andy, over to you.
Yeah, hi guys. I'm Andy Curlewis, so I look after the brand digital and communications part of the business for Cielo. They're a global talent consulting and outsourcing business, or RPO is more commonly known. So I guess as well as thinking through how to engage our own workforce, which operates across 103 countries and 39 languages and is more than 60% remote, I help companies with employer branding and culture, as well as digitization and change. So good to be here.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Andy. And Kristen, your introduction, please.
Hi, and thanks again for having me. I'm Kristen Anderson. I am the Global Employer Brand Lead at BAT. Prior to that, I was a consultant. I was at Korn Ferry for the last many years, and I really do come from a traditional advertising and marketing background, Publicis Sapient and McCann. So my passion is, ensuring that our global brand story is authentic and that we're addressing, current activity. And so today is particularly exciting because I think that we all have a brand story as a result of COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, look, thank you. That's great introductions. So, Anna, I'll put the first question to you. So, as I say, we had some pre-submitted questions. How do you think the pandemic will change the way we work long term? I can't hear you, Anna. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thanks for the question. I was saying that that's a big one. I do believe that what we're going through right now is a huge acceleration of digital Darwinism for companies and all type of organizations, in the sense that we do need to adapt not only our processes but our people strategy through good culture reinforcement. And I think that hybrid working model is a good fit for all of that.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Anna. And to you, Andy, how do you feel the pandemic is changing the way we work long term?
I think the pandemic is the latest in a number of things which were actually changing this. So obviously one of the buzzword bingos of our industry is the future of work. And it's interesting to consider. In many respects, I think what's happening over the last 5 weeks or 10 weeks has accelerated that future of work. So when we used to talk about working from anywhere or virtual onboarding, digitizing the recruitment process, and even managing completely virtual teams, I think many of us thought that that was at some point in the future. So what we thought may be 5 years, we're now having to do in 5 months, and in some cases 5 weeks, because people have had to completely transform. So I suppose the question is how permanent will that change be? And I think that this is just an accelerator of some much bigger trends which were heading that way anyway. So I think we'll see a very different makeup of work. And I think it's probably here to stay for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very true. And Kristen, obviously to you now as well, in terms of how it will change the way we work long term.
Yeah, of course, Anna and Andy, I completely agree. I think that there are also real opportunities for us. I think we're certainly seeing in a very positive way where there might be gaps in our way of working that you might not have identified in a more traditional, get up, commute, go to the office, and in more of those typical business environments. So we're communicating slightly differently. We are connecting slightly differently, and not just because we're forced to commune in the way that we're commuting today, but because we were seeing gaps in, ways of delivering. I think there's also, when we talk about flexibility, I think, Anna and Andy are right on. It isn't just about this work-life balance, and flexibility means we're sitting at home and I can throw a load of wash on and I can feed a child and then come back to work. Flexibility in a really different way in terms of how, and can we step up to this? How can we truly support a workforce to feel calm and confident in their holistic lifestyle? So really helping them to balance, but then also, you know, we're here to do business, right? We're here to deliver. So delivery, I think, is going to look a little bit different as well.
And of course, let's not forget the most important thing is unwelcome co-workers in your own home, namely your children. So I think that for all of us,
Yes.
please don't come in. So I think that's a feature for many of us, which will take some getting used to.
Yeah, I must say my children want to do my job because all you do is talk all day, Daddy. You just talk. That's all we do. Just chat. Chat on video.
I call that survival working, because that's what a lot of employees have been doing so far. This is not a good example of what hybrid or remote working should be for a lot of parents.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think just lastly from me, if we look at, and I've been around longer than I at this stage in my life I care to admit, but if we look at other massive shifts in the way that we work, and of course a pandemic, this is emotional. But if I look back to, 2000 to 2002, I was in Silicon Valley. In those days, we called it the dot bomb. And we didn't think that working was ever going to be the same again. We thought that all of us would, lose our jobs, and how would we ever have opportunity again? And then, I mean, right back to the Industrial Revolution and after wars, and you see that what happens is roles are created as a result. So I love what Andy's saying about this. What is this future of work? There are going to be opportunities that are born from this that will be exciting. We just have to keep our eyes open for that, because there will be opportunity.
Yeah, so it shows a huge amount of adaptability, doesn't it, of humans, just to be able to deal with what's in front of you, and then somehow get to what is a new normal, I guess. So that brings us quite nicely on to another question that was submitted. I mean, we had a number of questions around the same topics. So this is really probably maybe starting with you, Andy, on this time. For businesses considering a hybrid approach, where some staff permanently work from home and others are always back in the office, what will employee engagement look like in those situations?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to really think a lot about this if we haven't been already. We've for my company, we were already 60% remote anyway, and across lots of different countries, which have very different time zones. So I think there's probably three things that I think about a lot there. One is the construct of, or the notion of, inclusion. So we think of inclusion traditionally as diversity and inclusion, but actually diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly for those that are in offices and are not in offices, those that have access to certain digital tools or not. I think we've got to think quite clearly around how we're fair to everyone and we can be inclusive. I think the other thing that's really important is, if people are working remotely, it's even more important for us to be really clear about what our purpose is as a company and what our culture is. That's our North Star. That's what resonates the heart as well as the head of what you do. So I think we really want to make sure that we're clear there. And then, of course, the final piece is, if you haven't digitized already, you're going to have to do it quick. There are lots of tools out there, not all of which are secure. So how do you make sure you've got the right governance and adoption so you can actually do that properly?
Yeah, and it's that part about, isn't it, reskilling and upskilling staff, having to bring things in that they never used to had to learn. Excellent. And same to you then, Kirsten. How do you see employee engagement sort of looking like with a hybrid model?
Well, I think it's interesting, and I was contemplating the notion of this the other day, and I think it's also important that we acknowledge that not every single solitary thing has to change. There are things that we've been doing as global businesses, many of us on the call today, that have already been working. You shout out, Andy, that 60% of the workforce was already working remotely. There are things that anchor us as business that are already working, and I think it's important that we are communicating to our colleagues that there are things that are going to change. there are things that are going to be challenging. We talk about things like resilience. Maybe that means something a little bit different now because the rubber meets the road now. It's not just something in an assessment, it's real. And so while that is happening in a parallel path, I think it's also really important to acknowledge, but hey guys, there's a lot that we already have bedded down. And I totally agree that it is anchored in that culture, that it's anchored in the fact that we do a lot well, and it doesn't all have to get crumpled up and thrown away, and we're not starting from scratch. We're pivoting, we're adapting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, there's another really important thing that you just said there, Kristen, and that is the world suddenly completely changed 12 weeks ago. It's not like there was nothing before. And so I think one of the really important things there is you've got to be true to what you were. You can't suddenly reinvent yourself in 12 weeks, particularly given the last 3 or 4 weeks. So I think, you know, being authentic to what you were and making sure that you're adapting without throwing the baby out with the bathwater is really important. So I couldn't agree more.
Agree.
Yeah. Excellent. And to you, Anna, then, again, with a hybrid approach, what do you think employee engagement will look like?
I think that's the whole, just the concept of hybrid working model scares a lot, because I think companies, that what they have to do, as Kristen and Andy said, is kind of build from their culture. And these are models that are based on trust and responsibility and freedom. But I do think that companies have an amazing opportunity now to do employer branding inwards, if you want, for their employees. And I think a hybrid model is not only a matter of necessity, because right now with the setup of the majority of the offices, we can only bring back 50, perhaps 60, but no % of our people because of the social distancing. And as well, this week in the business status quo, that we had 27 countries. China was already saying Beijing is in partial lockdown, and all traveling and everything. We've stopped that, us and a lot of companies as well. But I do think that the engagement is about providing people with the tools that they need to and what I mean with this is not only providing mid-management and team leaders with the support to go through what is called the fight phase, right? Where you have to go on with your anxiety and take care of your team's anxiety during a situation that is completely awful. But as well, it's as well creating nomads teams. Nomads as in between knowledge and nomad. What I mean with this is this adaptability that people will have in the skill set, which is something that you mentioned, John, in your presentation, is about upskilling. With our study that we did with Boston Consulting Group, what we found out, and this is pre-COVID, is that 62% of employees will think that the work is going to change. But as well, 75% of those that they were already digital, they also thought that this was going to change. And it's as well about talent retention. A study that Stepstone Belgium did shows that now 1 out of 5 employees are thinking of changing the company of the management or the way a company manages the crisis, but as well is a huge opportunity for new talent, as in to attract talent, because now there is no limit in terms of barriers or different countries. Why are you going to spend a lot of money trying to find someone that speaks, I don't know, Russian in the UK market, while you can go to Russia and find your talent there and have them working not remotely, but I would say as part of your distributed workflows.
Yeah, it is really interesting as to how what's going on in the different countries, and certainly even within the countries, how people perceive these things differently. As I say, with some people really looking forward to going back, others not wanting to. It made me think actually with what you're saying there, culture came out sort of quite a bit, obviously with employee engagement. So I guess with such differences in terms of views that people may have, how do you maintain or even build a culture if you're a new business trying to build or change culture? How do you do that in the current environment? But something that may have taken years to cultivate, how do you stop it from sort of falling apart? I'll ask that question to you, Kristen.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think Andy, mentioned this. And, when we were having our conversation the other day, I used my family as an example. I have 2 teenagers, a husband, a home that I'm responsible for, and we've had to evolve and change as a family. And yet what we've done by really organically is we've always, over these last few months, we've retained the Andersons. And so how we moved out in the world more widely, we're just moving in that way ever so slightly differently in our home and just close around our home. And I think that Andy really hit it when he said it's about your truth. And that might sound a little emotional, but there is an element that is emotional to this. We've got to be emotionally intelligent around it, because it is always making sure, and again, Andy used that word I love, and that's purpose. It's what is it that your business is driving? What is the purpose of your business, small, medium, large enterprise? And what is it that has helped you to get to the stage, whatever the stage is that you are now? And it's challenging when there's massive shift and change, and global change like this, and unprecedented change like this, but it's just really anchoring what your values are. So it's defining those values and it's adhering to that. And then of course there's going to be that element of we've anchored there, and we know we need to go out into the bigger world because it's time for us to start doing that. Should we do A? Well, actually, A doesn't feel right for us. So let's do B. Let's test that. And then I think for all of us as business, again, small, medium, large enterprise, it's about failing and testing, failing, and 2 steps back, 5 steps forward. I think we are all, regardless of our business, regardless of our sector, we're going to have to become very comfortable. And it's challenging, but we're going to have to be really comfortable with change and failing and reverting and fixing. And our leadership will need to support us with that and drive that with us. And I think that those, for me, I believe that those will be key.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Angie, do you want to add anything to that regarding the culture and maintaining it, or building one with all the different views that people may have from employees?
Yeah, Kristen's nailed it. I think there's a head and heart thing about this. So from a head perspective, oftentimes when you talk about employer branding, people think that that's a marketing construct. In many respects, it's a blueprint for one of the blueprints of your people strategy. What are the policies around remote working? What are the policies around digital tools? What are the policies around reward recognition? So you've got to think about that head piece. But then the heart, like trust, is at an all-time low across government, politics, business, whatever. And yet, weirdly, if you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer of last year, people trust their employers more now than government or media. So, wow, we've got a massive imperative, never mind an obligation to make sure that we're doing this. So I think that we've got to walk the walk. There's a lot of companies out there which are getting called out big time for either not being authentic in the last few weeks, or trying to change very, very quickly in a way that wasn't themselves, or taking advantage of the pandemic to do other things that perhaps they wanted to do previously. So I think that trust is really important. And the final thing to say on that is that this is an era of digital tools, super fast broadband, everyone's got connected, and it's an era of fake news. So that trust piece has never been more important. So just walk the walk. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny. I think one of the very first things that I was looked at working in online recruitment or working within recruitment 20 years ago was really someone talking about the job seeker journey that they have. Impacts the opinion they have on that brand. So a poor job, this is going back. This isn't to do with this now. It's at the very start. If you have a poor job seeker experience, then I might not buy those, that brand of clothing or that product anymore, because you know what, you didn't get back to me, you didn't respond. I don't know what happened. It's amazing, because actually their product hasn't changed, but your experience of them has. And Kristen, again, I think really, really funny actually that it kind of actually what you look for, I guess, in the type of companies that you work for, the type of environment that you probably try to create around you, that actually it's reflected in both the family and the kind of the type of businesses, and what you want to get out of your career and things is very much reflected in both home and work. So yeah,
for sure.
very interesting. Okay, I mean, trust came out an awful lot there, and it is absolutely a key part. So in the presentation, I mentioned employee trust and loyalty. In this unique situation, how have you or a business you know of adapted your people strategy? I can start with you, Anna, on this.
Sure. Well, talking about myself, talking about the network, we are currently transitioning into a hybrid model. So we've realized, and I realized, that we've been doing a lot of homework throughout the years, which is good. That's why we are more ready for this. But what we're doing is really a lot of design thinking on this, which is something that Kristen already mentioned, in the way that we are using these months to maintain our adaptability with, and we try. I think Lisa Sutherland already said that in her book, that is a New York Times bestseller, that there is no one single formula for a successful hybrid model. And what you have to do is just basically what we are doing is try out with a lot of communication, constant, clear, and current communication with a lot of transparency. We are building virtual rituals among the team, and we are learning from the innovators, basically. For example, Basecamp. They have on their website, everyone can see what is the philosophy of their internal communication. That is, for me, like a communication manifesto. And he was really saying this, what's his name, Jason Fried, already a TED Talk in 2010. As office should be for social interaction, and home would be for when you want to avoid these distractions. Because I think that a lot of employers have this misconception of employees are not going to work. And I really disagree with that, because what we've been seeing so far is that, of course, there is voluntary distractions at home, but that will mean that it's a huge problem with loyalty and engagement of your people. But what we see is that in the office, the distractions come to you involuntarily. A lot of people asking you questions, a lot of people interrupting, and I think that we've been seeing that working from home, we consider it more tiring or more intensive, or intense, but because we've been working 3 hours nonstop. When could we do that in the office before, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Over to you, Kristen, in terms of how have you or businesses you know of adapted the people strategy?
Well, I love that what I'm experiencing is a hybrid of the hybrids. So and there's that safe, again, I'm quite visual, so I picture these anchor points. That helps me feel safe and secure. So we've got this anchor of business as usual, and that feels safe and secure. And we talk about trust. Mm-hmm. And I trust that when I get up and come into my kitchen and get online, that my job hasn't changed. My delivery responsibility hasn't changed. My remit hasn't changed. And so all of us are delivering business as usual. Now, the hybrid of the hybrid is that possible in the way we did it 3 months ago? In many instances, no. So it's when you're going down that path of your everyday and you have to, again, pivot or find that yield in the road and make a choice. It's how are we doing that as a business? One of the things I have found really grounding is we have an internal COVID newsletter. And what that newsletter amplifies, and its complete and total focus, is what is happening in the rest of the world. We're in 180 markets. And so what are certain countries, certain functions doing when they're going down that path of delivery and they hit that hurdle, that bump? How are they getting around that because of COVID? And so they're sharing those stories with us all globally. So each Friday I'm getting that newsletter. And that's really exciting to see. There's security here. We're all trying to, that light at the end of the tunnel is really business as usual. And then it's ensuring that we're adapting where we need to. And again, that security of, we don't have to crumple it all up and chuck it away and start from scratch. So for BAT, we're a Fortune 100 company. There is so much in place that works for us as a workforce in delivering what we need to deliver. So it's just using that as our benchmark, and then adapting where and when we need to. And then of course, supporting our people where that can be challenging. And I do think that many global organizations, many small medium businesses as well, are really getting sensitive to that mindfulness, because as your data shared, there's a huge percentage across different component parts of Europe that are keen to get back to that routine. So I think it's identifying, is it that you miss truly, it's getting under the skin of, do you truly miss, say, a commute? Do you truly miss getting up an hour and a half earlier, or all of those component parts of a traditional day for many of us? Or do you just miss the safety of a routine? So how do we help you shift the routine?
Yeah, I would like that. I think the anchor points are really, really important. And I like the hybrid of a hybrid, sort of hybrid squared type thing. Okay, and then another question that was submitted, and I'll start with you, Andy, on here, just conscious of time moving, is really, have there been any particular approaches from UK businesses or businesses around the world that have particularly impressed you in terms of people strategy?
Yeah, I think there's 2 or 3 things that really stand out for me. Those that have moved quickly to change their policies and the way in which people are rewarded has been great. You've had to do that in order to be able to digitize and to remote and to have the hybrid of the hybrid of the hybrid. Because if you haven't got the right policies in place, you can slice and dice all you want, but it ain't going to happen. So no, I think a lot of companies have moved very quickly, and it's not hard to change an HR policy. It really isn't. The other thing that I've been super impressed by is those organizations which have not deprioritized their D&I programs. They've said, if we're going to come out of this and we're going to come out of it well, it's going to be never more important to be inclusive, to understand how diverse our customer markets are, our own organization, and if we're going to be truly successful, this is going to be one of the key pillars, not something that we just downplay. So it's been great to see some of those organizations really step that up as well.
Yeah, and that maybe links back to what you were saying towards the start around the speed of change as well. People were always talking about these things, but now they're very firmly on the table in this current environment, right? Let's look at these things and make that change. To you, Anna, are there any businesses around the world that have impressed you in terms of their people strategy?
I'm getting to be such a fan of Shopify. What they are doing is I think what they're doing is providing stability to their employees, saying we are remote by default, and no one is going to come to the office because we are going to take this time to adapt the office. so that we could perhaps in 2021 go back and say, if they have, probably they would keep their hybrid model, but with everyone at ease, which is as well our goal personally towards this.
Yep. Brilliant. Okay. Well, look, we're down to the last 5 minutes. So what I'd like each of you to do, I'll start with you, Kristen, just going round and round. It's really just for the last few minutes, just sort of, the 3 sort of top tips that you would sort of give to this audience to really help them sort of navigate the current situation.
Sure. I think we've covered all of these things, and this is really just personally how I embrace each day. And it's stay true to yourself, to your culture. Use that again. I'm going to use that term. Really anchor in your culture and your set of beliefs and purpose. Communicate more than ever. We've been implementing those extra weekly, monthly sessions we didn't have before as teams and wider teams, and then make sure that you're telling those stories and keeping everybody close with those communications. And then I am, as I say, I am a person of a certain age, so I was raised by an old-fashioned set of parents, and be kind when I was sent off to school at 5 years old. And now this is a cool thing, and I'm thrilled that it's cool, because my kids are growing up with this notion of be kind, but it is be kind, try to be flexible, but it's also, acknowledging that change can be a little painful. And it can be really, really painful for people around us, maybe more than it is for us. So it's just, I think, really being sensitive to that. Those are my sort of 3 tick boxes each day.
Excellent, excellent. And to you, Andy, your 3 tips.
I'd have the 3 same tips. So my 4th, 5th, and 6th. Funnily enough, we would agree. But the 4th is digitize, and digitize quick, whether you like it or not. It's something that you're going to have to do. The 5th is then a new term, which is digital anthropology, and that basically is make sure you've got the right balance between the human and the robot. And that isn't just around AI or automation. How do we as a workforce get our heads around the fact that we have to use all of these digital tools? I have 2 teenage daughters. I have no idea what half the stuff they are doing actually is anymore. And so within the workplace, we've got to be really cognizant of that, because the final thing is to just think about the anxiousness that many people will have, either the changes that we're seeing in terms of where to work, the need to be digitizing and using tools they've never used before, or just the simple fear, is my job going to exist in 6 months, 6 years? So to really think about how do we continue to not just inspire and engage, but there's also a reassure piece. And back to Universal's grief continuum, how do you make sure you've got a really clear sense of that?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. And to you, Anna, obviously coming last with 6 points already made. They may have been covered, but do you have your 3 tips, please?
Sure. My 7th will be do employer branding from the soul, not only people, but to attract the good people that are out there and looking for a good company with flexibility to work on. Invest a lot in your people, not only creating these nomads teams with adaptable skill sets, invest in upskilling plans, but as well in mental health programs to keep the burnout away.
Yep.
And prototype a hybrid, fail forward. It's okay. Use the summer time to bring a hybrid model with stability. A lot of people are going to be days anyway, so it's a better that people can do for companies.
Excellent. I've jotted all 9 points down, and I'm going to ensure that we're doing those things. So look, thank you so much for agreeing to be panelists and for your insights and tips. I mean, to me, the words culture, brand, trust, and loyalty just come out time and time again, especially in this current environment. So thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to move back to finish. Okay, can everyone? I'm not sure if everyone can see the final slide. I got a nod there. So we'll follow up with email and with answers to questions that we didn't get to during the webinar. Keep an eye out, please, for the follow-up email, as that will include the slides, a recording of the webinar, and a request for your feedback. If you have 5 minutes, I'd really appreciate you completing the feedback survey, because there's a huge amount to cover here when you look at the impact on recruitment on a global scale. So please let us know if there are certain countries or sectors that you would like to know more about, so we can shape future international webinars. So thank you again to the panelists. Thank you for everyone for dialing in and joining, and have a very good rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.